The bus rattled along the narrow county road, its headlights carving brief tunnels of light through the darkness. Beyond the glass, the field stretched flat and endless under the starless night, broken only by the occasional shape of a leafless tree. Autumn had stripped the land bare, leaving it skeletal and cold. Evan Porter pressed his forehead against the chilled window. He was tired, the kind of tired that came from weeks of moving from one temporary place to another. This new town wasn't supposed to be permanent either. Just a small sublet he'd found online, barely furnished, just enough to give him a roof until he could figure things out. The bus driver barely slowed when they reached the stop. The old street sign rattled in the wind, its paint flaking in the dim light. Evan stepped off the bus and onto cracked asphalt. The street here was darker, quieter, and the air had that smell, damp leaves, distant with smoke, and something faintly metallic. The house was only 2 blocks away. It was an older 2-story, narrow, its paint weathered to a dull gray. The porch creaked under his weight, and the key the landlord had left in the mailbox turned easily in the lock. Inside, the air felt different. Cool, almost still, as if the place had been sealed up for months. A thin layer of dust coated the floorboards, and when he switched on the overhead light, the bulb flickered before holding. The living room was sparsely furnished. An old couch, a coffee table with water stains, and curtains that hung limp and discolored. He explored briefly. The kitchen was functional but outdated, with yellowed tiles and a humming refrigerator. The bathroom smelled faintly of mildew, the shower curtain patterned with curling blue flowers. Upstairs, the single bedroom had a low, sloping ceiling. There was a bed with a worn mattress, a dresser missing a drawer, and a single small closet. It was quiet, too quiet. Evan told himself that was what he needed. Quiet meant safety. Quiet meant a break from the chaos of the last year. Still, as he unpacked the few belongings he'd carried in his duffel, he had the faint sense of being observed. It was nothing tangible, just that subtle pressure at the back of the mind that made you glance over your shoulder. He looked, of course, but the corners of the room were empty, the hall was empty, and the narrow staircase leading down was empty too. By midnight, he was in bed. The house groaned occasionally, the way old does when it cools. He drifted into a shallow, restless sleep. At some point, he wasn't sure when, a faint sound stirred him awake. It was almost like scratching, very light, almost delicate, but irregular. His first thought was that it was coming from the roof. A branch, maybe a squirrel. He rolled over and pulled the blanket higher. The sound stopped, and then, seconds later, it came again, but this time it was closer, not above the roof. Inside, above the ceiling. Evan stared at the darkness above him, where the low ceiling loomed. His mind tried to explain it. Wood settling, pipes contracting in the cold. But the sound had a pattern now. Slow, careful, like something moving on hands and knees. Or crawling. The noise continued for several minutes, stopping and starting, never quite settling into a rhythm. Evan lay motionless, his eyes adjusting to the dim orange glow from the street lamp outside. The ceiling above him seemed too close now, as if the slope of the room had lowered in the night. He tried to tell himself it was just his mind, fog with half-sleep, making shapes in the shadows. But there was something else, a faint weight in the air, like the pressure before a storm. The scratching stopped. In the silence that followed, he could hear his own breathing, shallow and uneven. Then, so faintly that he almost thought it was in his head, there came another sound, not scratching this time. Something softer, a drag, a shuffle. It was directly above him. The ceiling groaned, just slightly, as though supporting more weight than it was meant to bear. He knew the attic was small, little more than a crawl space, but whatever was up there was moving, not scurrying like an animal, not quick and nervous. Slow, deliberate. Evan's skin prickled. He forced himself to sit up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His bare feet touched the cold floorboards. He listened. The sound had stopped again. The attic entrance was in the hallway just outside his bedroom. A square panel set into the ceiling. He stepped into the hall, the floor creaking beneath his weight. The air here was colder, enough to raise goosebumps on his arms. He stared up at the panel. It was shut tight. Dust clung to the edges. There was no ladder, no obvious way for something to come down. He stood there for a long minute, holding his breath, but nothing moved. No sound at all now. Finally, he turned back into his bedroom and shut the door. He didn't lock it. The idea of locking himself in somehow felt worse. But he pushed the dresser halfway in front of it before climbing back into bed. Sleep came in fits. Dreams swirled, muddled, and every time he half woke, he expected to hear that crawling sound again. When morning finally came, gray and weak through the curtains, the noises of the night seemed almost absurd. In daylight, the house looked harmless, just worn, tired, and in need of maintenance. Evan decided to check the attic. He found a folding step stool in the kitchen and carried it upstairs. When he pushed open the panel, a thin stream of stale, cold air drifted down. The attic was empty. Mostly, there were a few old boxes, a broken lamp, and a heavy, lingering smell of dust. He climbed up enough to shine the flashlight from his phone around the space. The beam revealed spiderwebs thick as gauze and insulation that looked decades old. Then he saw them. Faint, irregular marks in the dust. Not footprints, exactly, but impressions, round in places, long in others, as if made by knees and hands. They formed a loose path across the attic, directly above where his bed sat below. The impression stopped at the far end of the attic, disappearing into a shadowed corner. He aimed his light there, but the insulation and beam swallowed the glow. Still, he could see it was darker there than it should be. An unnatural kind of dark, like a patch of night that sunlight couldn't touch. A cold ripple passed through him. He lowered the panel and stepped down, the hollow thud of it closing sounding too final, like sealing something in. For the rest of the day, the attic was far from his mind. He distracted himself with errands, found a small diner for lunch, walked along cracked sidewalks of the neighborhood. The sun dipped behind the skeletal trees, and the houses cast stretched, jagged shadows. That night, he climbed into bed telling himself it had all been in his imagination, just the brain finding patterns in noise. He almost believed it, until the ceiling above him creaked again. And this time it didn't stop. The creaking began faint and hesitant, as if testing the structure, but within minutes it grew bolder. Evan lay frozen, each sound tracing a slow path across the ceiling. The boards flexed in places, barely perceptible in the dim glow from the street lamp outside. There was no question now. Whatever it was heavy enough to bend the old wood, and it was moving directly above his bed. He turned onto his side, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The low slope made it feel close, almost within reach. And then the sound changed. No longer a crawl, no longer a drag. A shift. The sensation was impossible to ignore. The distinct weight of something pressing against the boards from above, as though it were lowering itself toward him. The light from outside caught on something pale between the hairline cracks in the old ceiling plaster. He blinked, unsure, but then it shifted again, a brief, glistening curve. A knuckle? A joint? No, not a joint. An eye, wide, glossy, fixed directly on him. Evan's breath caught in his throat. The eye didn't blink. For several long seconds, it remained perfectly still, unbroken by shadow or the twitch of movement. It was the kind of gaze that didn't study you so much as measure you. Then, slowly and possibly, the rest of the face emerged. It wasn't coming down through a hole. It was pressing through the ceiling, the plaster stretching and bulging as if softened from within. The skin was colorless, stretched thin over sharp bone. The mouth was a thin slit, curled upward at the edges into something that was not quite a smile. Evan tore his gaze away and rolled out of bed, the boards groaning under his feet. He backed toward the door, his eyes flicking upward despite himself. The face followed him. It rotated slowly, neck bending at an unnatural angle, so the thing could keep him in view. The long, thin fingers pressed into the plaster, the nails, if they were nails, dark and pointed. A crack split through the ceiling plaster, a fine line that ran from one wall toward the other. Dust sifted down like dry snow. He yanked the door open and stepped into the hallway. The cold hit him instantly, the same breathless chill he'd felt near the attic entrance. Somewhere above, the thing moved, fast now, crossing the attic toward the hall. The boards overhead groaned in rapid succession, and the sound was wrong, too fluid, too many points of contact at once. Evan didn't go for the front door. He bolted for the kitchen instead, instinct driving him to put as much space as possible between himself and the upper floor. The sound above followed, moving in sudden bursts, stopping, then resuming closer to the stairs. And then it stopped altogether. The silence was heavy, suffocating. He stood in the kitchen, every muscle tense, waiting for the next creak, the next shift of weight. But nothing came. The house was still, too still. Evan stayed in the kitchen for what felt like an hour, though the dim red numbers on the microwave told him it had only been 9 minutes since he fled the bedroom. Every muscle in his body ached from standing so rigidly, straining to hear any sound from above. The old refrigerator hummed in the background, but beneath that low mechanical drone, there was nothing. No creak of shifting wood, no whisper of movement in the attic, no sign the thing was still there. He dared a glance toward the staircase. The narrow hall was a tunnel of shadows, lit only by the faint street light spilling to the front windows. The upper floor was invisible from here, the landing just out of sight. For a moment, he thought maybe it had gone, if it had ever been there at all. Maybe his mind had invented the eye, the fingers, the mouth pressed against the ceiling. Sleep deprivation could do that. Stress could do that. He took a step toward the front door, keys already in his hand. If he could just get outside, he could put distance between himself and this place. Find a motel, even sleep in the bus station until morning. Anywhere but here. The sound came before his second step, a dry, tearing noise. It came from the ceiling above the living room, not from the stairs. He froze. It was a slow, deliberate rip, like fabric being pulled apart in careful, steady increments. Dust sifted down into the air, catching the faint streetlight in a drifting haze. Something was peeling its way through the plaster. Evan's mind struggled to understand what he was seeing as the surface of the ceiling bulged downward, a jagged tear opening in the center. Pale fingers, impossibly long, curled around the edges of the gap and pulled. The movements were smooth, almost graceful. The gap widened, and then a head emerged, upside down, hanging through the hole. The skin was stretched tight over bone, eyes wide and fixed on him, the mouth still curved into that almost smile. Hair, thin and brittle-looking, hung toward the floor. The thing's body followed, unfolding in unnatural increments, limbs bending wrong, shoulders rotating as if there were too many joints. It didn't drop. It didn't leap. It crawled down the wall head first, moving with the eerie precision of a predator that had done this many times before. Evan stumbled backward, his heel catching on the kitchen threshold. He didn't take his eyes off it. The thing's hands, if they could still be called that, gripped the wall with those dark, pointed nails, anchoring it as it descended. Its movements were silent, except for the faint rasp of its nails scraping the old paint. Halfway down it paused. Head still inverted, it tilted slightly, as though considering him, measuring the distance between them. calculating. That small motion was enough to snap his paralysis. He turned and bolted through the kitchen toward the back door. His fingers fumbled with the lock, the cold metal refusing to turn quickly enough. Behind him, he could hear the soft thud of limbs touching the floor. It was in the kitchen now. The lock gave, and the door swung open into the backyard. He ran, the cold night air burning his lungs, grass slick with dew beneath his bare feet. Somewhere behind him, too close, came the whisper of movement, faster than he thought it could move. He didn't look back. Not yet. Evan tore across the backyard, the damp grass numbing his feet. The cold sliced through the thin fabric of his shirt, but adrenaline kept him moving. Ahead, a chain-link fence marked the edge of the property, its metal glinting faintly under the thin moonlight. The thing was still behind him. He could hear it now, not footsteps, but a skittering, a sliding across the ground as if its limbs bent and folded to cover more distance with each movement. The sound didn't match the rhythm of a human body. It came in uneven bursts, sometimes so fast it blurred, sometimes pausing just long enough for him to think it had stopped. He reached the fence and grabbed the cold steel, hauling himself up. The metal rattled under his weight, the links biting into his hands. Halfway over, he heard it, the sudden stop of movement behind him. He risked a glance over his shoulder. It stood at the edge of the grass, the shadows clinging unnaturally to its frame. Its head hung slightly to the side, as if curious. Those long arms dangled toward the ground, fingers twitching. The eyes glistened with that same unbroken, calculating stare. Evan threw himself over the fence, landing hard on the other side. His ankle twisted on the uneven dirt, sending pain up his leg, but he kept moving, limping toward the dark line of trees beyond the neighboring lot. The forest swallowed him in seconds. Branches clawed at his arms and face. The underbrush cracked beneath his weight. Somewhere behind, the thing was following, quieter now, as if the woods were its natural terrain. The ground sloped downward, and he stumbled into a shallow gully. The darkness here was thicker, the air colder. His breath came in ragged bursts, clouding in front of him. He pressed himself against the bank, trying to listen over the pounding of his own heartbeat. Silence. He didn't know how long he stayed there. Every nerve stretched to breaking, until the silence itself became unbearable. Slowly, he lifted his head above the gully's edge. It was there, directly across from him, no more than 10 feet away, clinging to the side of a tree like an insect. Its limbs splayed wide, body flattened unnaturally against the bark, head tilted in that same curious angle. The mouth stretched wider now, too wide, showing nothing inside, no teeth, no tongue, just a black void. It didn't move toward him. Not yet. Instead, it began to crawl upward, higher into the branches, vanishing into the canopy without a sound. The last thing he saw before it disappeared completely was its face, hanging upside down between the leaves, watching him. He ran until the forest gave way to an empty road. No cars, no lights, just asphalt and silence. He had no idea how far he'd gone or in which direction. The house was gone, hidden somewhere behind miles of dark trees. When the sun finally rose, weak and pale, he found himself sitting at the edge of the road, legs shaking, clothes torn. The world looked normal again, but the quiet wasn't the same. It was the kind of quiet you only notice when something was listening. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.